Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today's a big one. We're going to be talking about the new album from Beck, titled Morning Phase. Now, full confession time here. I've been a fan of Beck for years. If I was looking for an act I would describe as my go-to for describing what indie rock can deliver at its absolute best, Beck would be near the top of my list. Beautifully textured instrumentation, incredibly dense lyrics, and a real heartfelt connection to his music that shows that he's giving it his absolute all. He's one of the most talented composers and songwriters to explode in the 90s, and all of his albums are worth your time, with my personal favorites being Mutations and, of course, Sea Change. Now, that being said, Beck has been fairly quiet over the past few years. His last major project attracting headlines being Songreader, a book full of sheet music that he wrote for others to put together if they wanted to play his material. Now, it turned out he had a very good reason for delaying his most recent effort. He had received a spinal injury back in 2008, which had led to a very painful recovery process. That, on top of his other assorted projects, of which there were many, and a change in label to Capitol Records, meant that by the time Beck had planned to release his newest album, 6 years had gone by, which can really feel like an eternity when it comes to the fast-paced world of indie rock. But now, he's finally back with his newest album, Morning Phase, and I couldn't be more excited. A return to his country and folk roots with a decidedly lighter tone, paired as a companion piece to Sea Change, one of my favorite albums of the 2000s. There aren't many ways to get me more enthusiastic about an indie rock project. So, did it live up to my high expectations? Well, I gotta be honest here. The first 3 listens of this album didn't really impress me. And it only until I started digging into the lyrics, I wasn't prepared to have a lot of positive things to say about this record as a whole. But then I figured out what Beck was going for on this record, and wow. If there is a better album redeemed by lyrics and greater context this year, it will be Beck's Morning Phase. And the gut punch of a realization, it's so good, I almost want to put up a spoiler warning. So, okay, you know what? Here's what I'll do. If you want to go ahead and go in cold to this album, my advice will be to turn off this review right now. Get this album and listen to it directly after listening to Sea Change. If you haven't listened to Sea Change ever, well, you're about 12 years too late to the party, and all you need to do is to go and listen to that album again right now. I promise you, you won't regret it. Everybody else who wants to stick around, okay, are they gone? Okay. The first thing you will notice immediately about this album is that the sound is very reminiscent of Sea Change in a good way. Catchy, finger-picked acoustic melodies, beautifully harmonized string sections, and moments where the music could send you to sleep for how organically textured and calming and resonant it is. And yet, the production feels a little bit bigger and more spacious. The reverb is thicker, the sounds linger in the mix. There's more echo and synthetic elements that seem to disrupt the intimacy at first listen, especially when you hear Beck's vocals. And while he's always been great at conveying emotion and vulnerability through his voice, you start to wonder why on earth he decided to use so much echo and multi-tracking, and how it never quite feels as intimate in the mix as you would expect from this sort of album. For most of this record, indeed, Beck sounds very distant, almost detached from the experience, and you start to wonder if he succumbed to the reverb-heavy modern production that's been annoying me so goddamn much in modern indie rock. Throughout my first few listens, I seriously thought more intimate, raw production on his vocals would better fit the more organic instrumentation. So what was Beck doing here? And then if you went to the lyrics and the melody lines, well, they even made less sense in context with the rest of the album. For an album titled Morning Phase, why were the lyrics so melancholy and desperate? The melody's so loaded with minor keys and very real sorrowful emotions. I went in expecting sunshine and cheer, maybe a quiet, uplifting feeling if you wanted to go for something more subtle. Not this emotionally compelling yet very distinctly sad and melancholic music. What the hell was going on here? And then it hits you. Beck's Morning Phase isn't just a companion piece to Sea Change. It's a sequel. Whereas Sea Change told the heartbreaking, emotionally draining story of a breakup, Morning Phase is the aftermath, telling the story of both partners trying, failing, and eventually succeeding in moving on. That's why the production is so big and spacious. It only emphasizes how distant these two people have become from each other. And suddenly, all the weird decisions lyrically in the melodies, they all make complete sense. The album starts off as fairly intimate with Morning, where Beck is trying to convince the partner to start again. It's on a new day. But then again, she's moving on, trying and not really succeeding to integrate into regular life with the song Heart is a Drum, mostly because there's still underlying emotion there that she hasn't fully processed. They try for a final departure and split and say goodbye, but you know it rings hollow, and Beck spends his next 3 songs trying to cope with his own feelings and trying to be on his own. This, incidentally, is the weakest part of the album, not because Beck doesn't succeed incredibly well in capturing the very tricky emotions of trying to be emotionally isolating from somebody with which he once had a very powerful connection, but because that's not exactly a pleasant emotion to try and capture. It doesn't make the songs all that, well, good to really listen to. They're not comfortable emotions. And while the moment of weakness in Unforgiven, where he says he'll wait for her to come back, it's a bit of a respite, the album hits its weakest point with Wave, where Beck tries to capture that isolation moment, and he does do it, but it doesn't come across very well. Then again, I don't find the song very well written either. It's a little bit underwritten for my taste, so maybe that contributes to the reason. And then we get a very human moment on this album. The girl comes back into the picture. Don't Let It Go seems to imply her lingering feelings push her back towards Beck. And in Blackbird Chain, Beck seems overjoyed, and he swears that he will do anything to rebuild the relationship to what it was, to something that he so desperately craves. And yet the instrumentation in those last few bars and that little instrumental segment between tracks paints the picture that both of them knows that this isn't gonna work. It leads into the best song on this album in Turn Away, both in its simple poetry and in the deeper meaning, where the girl realizes that it will only make things far worse if they end up trying again, because there's so much deeper history there, and there's so much that makes them very different people. So she must move on with her life, and Beck needs to be okay with that. And then the album just ends on 2 songs that capture both parties' very explicit points of view. Country Down is Beck's point of view, with the production on his voice eased back to sound a little bit more intimate, and where he muses on being left behind at the countryside where he grew up. And while there is grief there, he sounds as if, you know what, he'll make it through somehow. The real highlight, though, is Waking Light, the song where the girl finally gets over her feelings and forgets Beck altogether. And while the relationship has shaped her life in some way, the emotional ties have faded, and she can move on. And it's the best possible thing that she could have hoped for, like waking up into a brand new dawn. In short, this album is genuinely great, but it's also the sort of album that will mislead some people if they don't get the proper context. When critics are saying that it's a companion piece to Sea Change, they aren't kidding in the slightest here, and it works best when paired with that album. Now, that being said, it's not better than Sea Change. Some of the production gimmicks do wear a little thin at some points. Some of the songs are a little underwritten from a technical standpoint, given that Beck is one of the best songwriters in the industry. That did strike me as a bit of a weakness. And while Beck does manage to build an impressive and startlingly effective emotional roller coaster here, there are songs where even Beck can't quite make the songs click effectively for me. Yet even with that, this album is a strong 8 out of 10 and a definite recommendation. This is the Beck for which I've been waiting for the past 6 years, and I'm happy to see him back in good form. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums you'd like me to take a look at from 2014 this year, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, see you next time.